Linda Rodriguez never imagined that saving a child's life would make her a target. Working the graveyard shift at Riverside General Medical Center in Cedar Falls, Oregon, she was used to chaos, emergencies, and split-second decisions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened when a desperate father burst through the emergency doors, carrying his unconscious son, or for the military convoy that would surround her hospital exactly 24 hours later. This is the story of a night that revealed who we really are when nobody's watching, and how one act of compassion can change everything. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as Linda Rodriguez clocked in for another 12-hour shift at Riverside General. The digital display on the wall read 11:03 p.m., and already the emergency department buzzed with its usual mix of controlled chaos and quiet determination. Linda had been working nights for 3 years now, ever since her husband passed away and left her with mounting medical bills and a mortgage she could barely manage on a nurse's salary. She pulled her dark hair back into a tight ponytail and adjusted her scrubs, the same faded blue ones she'd worn for the past 2 years. New scrubs weren't in the budget, not when she was sending money to her mother in Phoenix and trying to keep her 15-year-old daughter in decent clothes for school. Linda had learned to make do with less, to stretch every dollar until it screamed, and to find dignity in work that others often overlooked. "Rodriguez, you're on Trauma Bay 3 tonight," called out Dr. Richard Caldwell, the emergency department administrator, without looking up from his clipboard. Dr. Caldwell was the kind of man who measured success in numbers rather than lives saved, and he'd made it clear on multiple occasions that he considered Linda's cautious, thorough approach to patient care inefficient and costly. "Understood, Dr. Caldwell," Linda replied, gathering her supplies. She'd worked Trauma Bay 3 so many times she could navigate it blindfolded. It was the least desirable station, tucked in the corner where the air conditioning barely reached, and the equipment was older than most of her colleagues. But Linda had made it her own, keeping it spotless and organized with a precision that impressed even the most demanding physicians. The night started like any other. A construction worker with a lacerated hand, an elderly woman with chest pains, a teenager who'd crashed his skateboard and needed stitches. Linda moved between patients with practiced grace, her soft voice and gentle touch providing comfort in moments of fear and pain. She had a gift for making people feel heard, for seeing beyond the injury to the person underneath. Nurse Rodriguez, called Patricia Hayes, one of the few colleagues who'd become a genuine friend over the years. Patricia was working the central station, monitoring incoming ambulances and coordinating care. "We've got a quiet night for once. Maybe you'll actually get to take a break." Linda smiled, though she knew better than to trust a quiet emergency room. In her experience, the calm moments were just the universe's way of letting you catch your breath before the storm hit. She used the lull to restock supplies, clean equipment, and catch up on paperwork. Her handwriting was neat and precise, each chart completed with the thoroughness that had earned her recognition from previous supervisors, though Dr. Caldwell seemed unimpressed by anything that didn't directly impact the department's budget. Around 2 in the morning, Linda was updating a patient file when she heard the commotion. Raised voices, running footsteps, the distinctive sound of someone in genuine panic. She looked up to see a man bursting through the emergency entrance, his expensive suit wrinkled and torn, his usually perfect hair disheveled. In his arms, he carried a small boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, whose face had turned an alarming shade of blue. "Help!" the man shouted, his voice breaking with desperation. "My son, he's choking! Please, somebody help him!" Linda was on her feet instantly, her training taking over as she rushed toward them. She could see immediately that this was serious. The child's lips were cyanotic, his small body limp in his father's arms. There was no time for protocol, no time to wait for a physician or call for backup. This was a matter of seconds, not minutes. "Sir, I'm Linda. I'm a nurse. Let me help," she said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "What happened?" "We were at dinner," the man gasped, following Linda as she led them toward Trauma Bay 3. "He was eating, and then he just started choking. I tried everything, the Heimlich, back blows, nothing worked. Please, please don't let him die." Linda gently took the child from his father's arms, immediately assessing his condition. The boy's airway was completely blocked, and his oxygen saturation was dropping dangerously low. She could hear the wheeze of air trying to move through, an obstructed passage, and his pulse was rapid and thready. "I need you to step back, sir," Linda said firmly but kindly. "I'm going to take care of him." She positioned the child on the examination table and began emergency procedures. First, another attempt at back blows, striking firmly between the shoulder blades. Nothing. The child's color was getting worse, and she could see his father pacing frantically behind her, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone to make calls. Linda tried the Heimlich maneuver again, adjusting her technique for the child's smaller frame. Still nothing. The obstruction was lodged too deeply, and traditional methods weren't working. She could hear the father on the phone, his voice tight with panic as he spoke to someone, demanding that they send help, threatening consequences if anything happened to his son. "Where's the doctor?" the man demanded, spinning around to face Linda. "Why isn't there a doctor here? This is taking too long." "Sir, I understand you're frightened," Linda replied, never taking her focus off the child. "But right now, I need you to let me work." She made a decision that would later be scrutinized, questioned, and ultimately vindicated. The child needed a more aggressive intervention, something that would normally require a physician's order. But there was no time, and Linda had the training. She'd performed the procedure before, though never on someone so young, never under such pressure. Working quickly but carefully, Linda prepared for an emergency needle cricothyrotomy. It was a last resort, a procedure that would create an artificial airway below the obstruction. Her hands were steady as she located the cricothyroid membrane, the small space between two pieces of cartilage in the neck. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. One mistake could be fatal, but doing nothing would certainly be fatal. "What are you doing?" the father asked, his voice rising. "You're not a doctor. Where's the doctor?" "I'm saving your son's life," Linda replied simply, her focus absolute. She inserted the needle with precision, born of years of training and experience. Immediately, she could hear the whistle of air moving freely through the makeshift airway. The child's color began to improve almost instantly, the blue fading from his lips as oxygen finally reached his lungs. Within minutes, Tommy Thornfield was breathing on his own again, his pulse stabilizing, his color returning to normal. Linda monitored him carefully, ensuring the airway remained clear while preparing him for the physician who would take over. His care. She'd done what she had to do, what any competent nurse would do in the same situation, but she knew there would be consequences. Tommy, can you hear me?" the father whispered, leaning over his son as the boy's eyes fluttered open. "Dad?" The child's voice was hoarse but clear. "What happened?" The man's eyes filled with tears as he gently stroked his son's hair. "You scared me, buddy. You scared me so much." Linda stepped back, giving the family space while continuing to monitor the child's vital signs. It was then that Dr. Caldwell appeared, drawn by the commotion and the unusual activity in Trauma Bay 3. His expression was stern as he took in the scene, his eyes immediately focusing on the improvised airway. "Nurse Rodriguez, what did you do?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge that Linda recognized all too well. "The child was choking, Dr. Caldwell. Traditional methods weren't working, and he was in respiratory arrest." I performed an emergency cricothyrotomy to establish an airway. Dr. Caldwell's face darkened. That's a procedure that requires physician authorization. You overstepped your authority, Rodriguez. This could have gone very wrong. But it didn't, Linda replied quietly. The child is alive. The father, who had been focused entirely on his son, suddenly turned to face Dr. Caldwell. There was something in his posture, something in the way he carried himself, that suggested he was accustomed to being heard, to being taken seriously. "Are you criticizing the nurse who saved my son's life?" the man asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Dr. Caldwell seemed to recognize that he was in delicate territory. "Of course not, sir. We're grateful for the positive outcome, but there are protocols, procedures that must be followed for patient safety." "Patient safety?" the man repeated. "My son would be dead if this nurse had waited for your protocols." Linda continued working, checking Tommy's breathing, monitoring his pulse, making notes in his chart. She'd seen this dance before, the careful political maneuvering that happened when administrators tried to cover themselves while managing difficult situations. She knew that despite saving the child's life, she would likely face disciplinary action for exceeding her scope of practice. "What's your name?" the father asked suddenly, turning to Linda. "Linda Rodriguez, sir." "Linda Rodriguez," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you. Thank you for saving my son." Linda nodded, a small smile crossing her face. "I'm just glad he's okay. That's what matters." As the emergency physician arrived to take over Tommy's care, Linda began the process of documenting everything that had happened. She knew her actions would be reviewed, questioned, possibly punished. But as she watched the little boy talking quietly with his father, saw the color fully return to his cheeks and the steady rise and fall of his chest, she felt no regret. She had done her job. She had saved a life. Everything else was secondary. The father stayed close to his son as the medical team worked, but Linda noticed him making several phone calls, his voice low and urgent. She caught fragments of conversation about security, about making sure everything was handled properly, about people who would be very unhappy if anything went wrong. It suggested resources and connections far beyond what most families had access to. But Linda had learned not to speculate about her patients' backgrounds. Rich or poor, every life was equally valuable in her eyes. As Tommy was prepared for transfer to the pediatric intensive care unit for observation, his father approached. "Linda, one more time. Nurse Rodriguez," he said formally, "I want you to know that what you did tonight will not be forgotten. Not by me, and not by my son." "I appreciate that, sir," Linda replied. "I hope Tommy continues to recover well." The man studied her for a moment, taking in her worn scrubs, her tired eyes, the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, despite the chaos around her. "May I ask how long you've been a nurse?" 12 years, sir. 3 years here at Riverside General." He nodded slowly. 12 years of saving lives, I imagine. "I try to help where I can." "Yes," he said quietly. "I can see that." As the family was escorted upstairs, Linda returned to Trauma Bay 3 to clean and restock. She worked methodically, her mind already shifting to the report she would have to write, the questions she would have to answer, the potential consequences she would have to face. But underneath it all was a quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that when it mattered most, she had done the right thing. Dr. Caldwell reappeared as she was finishing her documentation. "Rodriguez, I need to see you in my office first thing tomorrow," he said curtly. "This incident will require a full review." "I understand, Dr. Caldwell." "Do you? Because what you did tonight was reckless. You put this hospital at serious legal risk by performing a procedure outside your scope of practice. The fact that it worked out doesn't change that." Linda looked up from her paperwork, meeting his gaze steadily. "A child's life was at stake, Dr. Caldwell. I did what my training prepared me to do. Your training prepared you to follow orders and respect the chain of command. Nothing more." After he left, Patricia Hayes approached Linda's station, her expression concerned. "Linda, are you going to be okay? Caldwell seemed pretty upset." Linda shrugged, though she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. "I'll deal with whatever comes. That little boy is alive, and that's what matters." "You did the right thing," Patricia said firmly. "Anyone with half a brain can see that." "Unfortunately, having half a brain isn't a requirement for hospital administration," Linda replied with a wry smile. The rest of the shift passed quietly, but Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She'd saved lives before, made difficult decisions under pressure, but there had been something different about tonight. Maybe it was the intensity of the father's gratitude, or the way he'd spoken about making sure her actions wouldn't be forgotten. Maybe it was simply the knowledge that she'd put her career on the line for a child she'd never met before and would likely never see again. As 7 a.m. approached and the day shift began to arrive, Linda gathered her belongings and prepared to head home. She had a few hours to sleep before her daughter got home from school, and then she'd spend the evening helping with homework and trying not to think about tomorrow's meeting with Dr. Caldwell. Walking to her car in the employee parking garage, Linda noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked near the exit. It hadn't been there when she'd arrived for her shift, and something about it struck her as unusual. But she was tired, and strange vehicles weren't uncommon around a hospital. She dismissed the thought and drove home through the early morning. Drizzle, unaware that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. 24 hours later, everything would be different. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Patricia Hayes' small office as she reviewed the overnight incident reports. As the senior charge nurse, Patricia had seen her share of emergencies, but something about the previous night's events troubled her deeply. She'd watched Linda Rodriguez perform under pressure with a skill and composure that impressed even the most experienced physicians. Yet she knew that Dr. Caldwell was preparing to crucify her for it. Patricia had been nursing for 27 years, long enough to recognize when politics trumped patient care. She'd also been around long enough to know that sometimes the best nurses were the ones who got punished for doing the right thing. Linda Rodriguez was exactly that kind of nurse, the kind who put patients first and worried about consequences later. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Angela Park, one of the newer nurses, standing in the doorway with a concerned expression. "Patricia, do you have a minute? It's about what happened last night with Linda." "Come in, Angela. Close the door." Angela settled into the chair across from Patricia's desk, her hands fidgeting with her stethoscope. "I've been thinking about it all morning. What Linda did was incredible. That little boy would have died if she'd waited for a doctor to arrive. But I heard Dr. Caldwell talking to the medical director this morning, and it doesn't sound good for her." Patricia leaned back in her chair, weighing her words carefully. "Linda saved a life last night. In my book, that's what nursing is about. But you and I both know that's not always how administration sees it." "It's not fair," Angela said, her voice rising slightly. "Linda is one of the best nurses we have. She's thorough, she's careful, and she genuinely cares about her patients. How can they punish her for that?" "Because institutions are more concerned with liability than lives," Patricia replied grimly. "Dr. Caldwell sees a nurse who performed a procedure outside her scope of practice. He sees potential lawsuits, regulatory violations, insurance problems. He doesn't see the child who's alive because Linda acted." Angela shook her head in frustration. "There has to be something we can do, some way to support her." Patricia was about to respond when her phone rang. The caller ID showed an external number she didn't recognize. Patricia Hayes, nursing supervisor. Ms. Hayes, this is Marcus Thornfield. My son Tommy was treated in your emergency department last night by Nurse Linda Rodriguez. Patricia straightened in her chair, gesturing for Angela to stay. Yes, Mr. Thornfield, how is Tommy doing? He's doing well, thanks entirely to your nurse. Miss Hayes, I'm calling because I understand that Nurse Rodriguez may face disciplinary action for her decision to save my son's life. Patricia chose her words carefully. Mr. Thornfield, I can't discuss personnel matters, but I can tell you that any incident involving emergency procedures is subject to standard review. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ms. Hayes, I want you to know that Nurse Rodriguez acted with exceptional skill and judgment last night. She saved my son when no one else was available to do so. The idea that she might be punished for that is unconscionable. I appreciate your perspective, Mr. Thornfield. Linda is indeed an exceptional nurse. I'd like to speak with your administration about this matter. Can you arrange a meeting? Patricia glanced at Angela, who was listening with obvious interest. I can certainly pass along your request to the appropriate parties. Please do. And Ms. Hayes, I want you to know that Nurse Rodriguez has friends she doesn't even know about yet. After hanging up, Patricia turned to Angela. Well, that was interesting. Who was that? The father of the boy Linda saved. He's not happy about the idea of her being disciplined. Angela frowned. Do you think it will make a difference? I mean, one parent complaint against the entire hospital bureaucracy. Patricia stood and walked to her window, looking out at the parking lot below. Angela, in my experience, when someone calls with that kind of quiet authority in their voice, they usually have the resources to back it up. We may not know who Marcus Thornfield is, but I have a feeling we're about to find out. Meanwhile, 3 floors up in the pediatric intensive care unit, Tommy Thornfield was sitting up in bed, coloring in a book his father had brought him. The breathing tube had been removed that morning, and his voice, though still hoarse, was strong and clear. Marcus sat beside the bed, his expensive suit replaced by casual clothes, his attention focused entirely on his son. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course, buddy. What's on your mind? The nurse last night, the one who helped me breathe. She seemed sad. Marcus looked up from his phone, where he'd been answering a steady stream of messages from concerned colleagues and business associates. Sad? What made you think that? I don't know, just the way she looked when the mean doctor was talking to her, like she was used to people being mean to her. Marcus set his phone aside completely, giving his son his full attention. What do you remember about her? Tommy considered this carefully, the way children do when they're trying to express something important. She had kind eyes, and her hands were really gentle when she was helping me. She talked to me like I was a real person, not just a sick kid. She is a good nurse, Marcus agreed. Dad, you know how you always tell me that we should help people. Who help us? Yes. Well, she helped me a lot, like she saved my life, right? So shouldn't we help her? Marcus smiled at his son's simple logic. What kind of help do you think she needs? I heard the mean doctor say she might get in trouble for helping me. That doesn't seem right. Marcus pulled his chair closer to the bed. Tommy, what if I told you that I'm already working on helping her? Really? How? Well, that's where it gets complicated, but I want you to know that Nurse Rodriguez won't be forgotten, not by us. Down in the emergency department, Linda was trying to catch a few hours of sleep in the on-call room before her meeting with Dr. Caldwell. She'd been replaying the events of the previous night over and over, analyzing every decision, every action, wondering if there was something she could have done differently. But each time she came to the same conclusion. Given the same circumstances, she would make the same choice. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter, Sophia. Mom, how did your shift go? You seemed worried when you left this morning." Linda smiled despite her exhaustion. Sophia was wise beyond her 15 years, shaped by the challenges they'd faced together since her father's death. She'd learned to read her mother's moods, to offer support when needed, and to be fiercely protective of the woman who sacrificed so much for her. "It was eventful," Linda texted back. "I'll tell you about it when I get home." "How was school?" Boring as usual. But Mom, Mrs. Chen asked me about college applications again. She thinks I should apply for some scholarships." Linda's heart swelled with pride. Sophia was an excellent student, the kind who could have opportunities that Linda never had. But college was expensive, even with scholarships, and Linda's finances were already stretched thin. "We'll talk about it," she replied. "Love you. Love you too, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." Linda closed her eyes, letting her daughter's words wash over her. Whatever happened in the meeting with Dr. Caldwell, whatever consequences she faced, she would handle it. She'd been handling difficult situations for years, and she wasn't about to stop now. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her rest. Patricia Hayes peeked in, her expression serious but kind. "Linda, I'm sorry to wake you, but there's been a development." Linda sat up, immediately alert. "What kind of development?" "The father of the boy you saved last night called me, Marcus Thornfield. He wants to meet with administration about your situation." "He doesn't need to do that," Linda said quickly. "I knew there might be consequences when I made the decision. I can handle whatever happens." Patricia stepped into the room fully, closing the door behind her. "Linda, I don't think you understand. This man isn't just grateful. He's determined. And something in his voice suggests he has the means to be very persuasive. I appreciate his concern, but I don't want special treatment. I did my job, and I'll face whatever review process is necessary. What if it's not about special treatment? What if it's about making sure good nurses are protected when they make life-saving decisions?" Linda considered this, recognizing the larger implications of her situation. How many other nurses had faced similar circumstances? How many had chosen to follow protocol instead of following their training, with potentially tragic results? "Has Dr. Caldwell said anything about the meeting?" "Not yet, but I have a feeling he's about to get a phone call that changes his perspective on things." Patricia was right. At that very moment, Dr. Caldwell was sitting in his office, reviewing Linda's personnel file and preparing his case for disciplinary action. He'd already drafted a formal reprimand citing violation of scope of practice, failure to follow proper protocols, and potential endangerment of patient safety. In his mind, the case was clear-cut, regardless of the positive outcome. His phone rang, the caller ID showing the hospital's main administrative line. "Dr. Caldwell, this is Janet from the director's office. Mr. Brennan needs to see you immediately in the executive conference room." "What's this regarding?" "He didn't say, sir, but he asked that you bring any files related to the Rodriguez incident from last night." Dr. Caldwell's confidence faltered slightly. Hospital directors didn't typically get involved in routine disciplinary matters unless there were larger issues at play. He gathered Linda's file and the incident reports, wondering what could have escalated the situation so quickly. The executive conference room was located on the top floor of the hospital, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Cedar Falls. Dr. Caldwell had been in this room many times over the years, usually for budget meetings or strategic planning sessions. But today felt different. Hospital Director James Brennan was waiting for him, along with the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Susan Martinez, and surprisingly the hospital's legal counsel, David Warner. This was definitely not a routine meeting. "Richard, please have a seat," Brennan said, his tone neutral but serious. "We need to discuss the incident involving Nurse Rodriguez last night." "Of course," Dr. Caldwell replied, settling into his chair and placing Linda's file on the table. I've prepared a full report recommending disciplinary action for violation of scope of practice." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "Before we discuss disciplinary action, we need to review the medical facts. Can you walk us through what happened?" Dr. Caldwell opened the file and began his account, emphasizing the procedural violations and potential risks associated with Linda's actions. He painted a picture of a nurse who had overstepped her authority and endangered both the patient and the hospital. When he finished, Dr. Martinez asked, "In your medical opinion, what would have been the likely outcome if Nurse Rodriguez had waited for physician authorization before proceeding?" "Well, that's impossible to say with certainty." "Dr. Caldwell," Dr. Martinez interrupted, "the child was in complete respiratory arrest. His oxygen saturation was critically low. How long could he have survived without intervention?" Dr. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps a few more minutes, but—" "A few minutes that we didn't have," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "According to the emergency physician who took over the case, Nurse Rodriguez's actions were medically appropriate and likely saved the child's life." Legal counsel David Warner spoke up for the first time. "Dr. Caldwell, we've received a call from Marcus, Thornfield's representatives. Are you familiar with that name?" "Should I be?" Warner exchanged glances with Director Brennan. "Marcus Thornfield is the CEO of Thornfield Industries, one of the largest defense contractors in the country. He's also a major philanthropist and serves on the boards of several prominent medical institutions." Dr. Caldwell felt the first stirrings of unease. "I see. Mr. Thornfield is very concerned about reports that the nurse who saved his son's life might face disciplinary action. He's requested a meeting to discuss the matter." "When?" Dr. Caldwell asked weakly. "This afternoon," Brennan replied. "And Richard, I want you to be very clear about something. This hospital has a relationship with the Thornfield Foundation that extends far beyond last night's incident. They've funded our new pediatric wing, our emergency department renovations, and our nursing scholarship program." The full weight of the situation was beginning to dawn on Dr. Caldwell. This wasn't just about one nurse and one incident. This was about institutional relationships, funding, and reputation. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. Dr. Martinez answered, "We're suggesting that before we take any disciplinary action, we very carefully consider whether Nurse Rodriguez's actions were appropriate given the circumstances. And from a medical standpoint, they absolutely were." Warner added, "From a legal standpoint, disciplining a nurse for saving a life could expose us to significant liability, especially if that nurse's actions were medically sound." Director Brennan concluded the meeting with a directive that left no room for interpretation. "Dr. Caldwell, I want you to reconsider your recommendation regarding Nurse Rodriguez. I want you to think very carefully about what kind of message we want to send to our nursing staff about making life-saving decisions under pressure. And I want you to be prepared to explain your position to Mr. Thornfield this afternoon." As Dr. Caldwell left the conference room, his certainty about the case had evaporated completely. What had seemed like a clear-cut disciplinary matter was rapidly becoming something much more complex and politically sensitive. Back in the pediatric ICU, Marcus Thornfield was preparing to leave his son's bedside for a few hours to attend the meeting at the hospital. Tommy was doing well, his recovery progressing better than anyone had hoped. But Marcus's mind was focused on ensuring that the woman who had saved his son received the recognition and protection she deserved. "Dad, where are you going?" Tommy asked as his father gathered his things. "I have a meeting at the hospital. Some important people want to talk about Nurse Rodriguez. Are you going to help her?" Marcus smiled, the same smile that had intimidated competitors and reassured allies for decades. "Yes, son. I'm going to help her very much." As Marcus left the hospital, he pulled out his phone and made a call to his assistant. "Jennifer, I need you to research everything you can about Linda Rodriguez. Employment history, education, family, situation, financial status, everything." "How soon do you need this information, Mr. Thornfield?" "Within the hour. And Jennifer, I also want you to look into the hospital's nursing programs, their scholarship funds, and any grants or donations they've received from our foundation. I'll have everything ready before your meeting." Marcus ended the call and looked back at the hospital building where his son was recovering. Linda Rodriguez had saved Tommy's life, but she had no idea that her own life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. In the quiet sanctuary of his study at Thornfield Manor, Marcus was surrounded by the fruits of his assistant's research. The report spread across his mahogany desk painted a picture of Linda Rodriguez that both impressed and troubled him deeply. Here was a woman who embodied everything he respected about the American work ethic, yet she was struggling in ways that no one should have to endure. The employment history showed 12 years of exemplary nursing service, with commendations from supervisors at every facility where she'd worked. Her evaluations consistently praised her clinical skills, her compassion with patients, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Yet despite her obvious competence, her salary had barely increased over the years, and she'd been passed over for promotions multiple times. The financial report was even more sobering. Linda was drowning in medical debt left over from her husband's cancer treatment. Despite working full-time at one of the most demanding jobs in healthcare, she was barely making ends meet. Her mortgage was underwater, her credit cards were maxed out, and she was sending what little extra money she had to care for her elderly mother in Phoenix. Most concerning of all was her daughter Sophia's college situation. The girl was clearly brilliant, with test scores and grades that would qualify her for admission to any university in the country. But without significant financial aid, higher education was simply out of reach. Sophia had already started working part-time jobs to help with household expenses, sacrificing study time that could have been spent on scholarship applications. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, processing the information. He'd built his fortune by recognizing value where others saw only risk, by understanding that the best investments were often in people rather than products. Linda Rodriguez represented exactly the kind of person he'd built his foundation to support, yet somehow the system had failed her completely. His phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer. "Mr. Thornfield, I've also compiled information on Riverside General's financial situation. The hospital has been struggling with budget cuts and staffing shortages. Dr. Caldwell's position was created specifically to reduce operational costs, often at the expense of patient care quality." Marcus wasn't surprised. He'd seen similar patterns in other institutions, where administrators prioritized short-term savings over long-term excellence. It was an approach that ultimately hurt everyone, patients and staff alike. He turned to his computer and began composing an email to his foundation's board of directors. If he was going to help Linda Rodriguez properly, he needed to think beyond just protecting her from disciplinary action. He needed to create a solution that would address the systemic problems that had created her situation in the first place. "Board members," he typed, "I want to propose a new initiative for the foundation. We've been funding nursing scholarships and medical equipment for years, but I think we need to be more direct in supporting the nurses who are already serving our communities with distinction." He outlined his vision for a program that would provide financial support, educational opportunities, and career advancement assistance to nurses who demonstrated exceptional patient care. It would be more than just charity. It would be an investment in the people who formed the backbone of the healthcare system. As he worked on the proposal, Marcus thought about his conversation with Tommy that morning. His son had recognized something essential about Linda Rodriguez, something that transcended her financial circumstances or her hospital's politics. She had treated him with dignity and compassion in his moment of greatest need, and she had risked her career to save his life. That kind of character couldn't be taught or bought. It could only be recognized and supported. Marcus's reflection was interrupted by a call from his security chief, Captain James Morrison. Morrison was a retired military officer who handled personal security for the Thornfield family, but his role had evolved over the years to include intelligence gathering and strategic planning. "Mr. Thornfield, I've completed the background check you requested on Linda Rodriguez. There are some additional details you should know." "Go ahead, James." Rodriguez served in the Army Reserve as a medic before becoming a civilian nurse. She completed 2 deployments to Afghanistan, where she received commendations for treating wounded soldiers under fire. Her military training is part of what enabled her to handle the emergency procedure so effectively last night. Marcus felt a surge of respect for Linda that went beyond gratitude. She was a veteran who had served her country with honor, then continued that service as a civilian nurse. The idea that such a person was being threatened with disciplinary action for saving a life was unconscionable. "James, I want you to arrange something for tomorrow. Something that will make a statement about how we value people like Nurse Rodriguez." "What kind of statement, sir?" Marcus smiled, the expression carrying the weight of decisions that had shaped industries and influenced policies. The kind that reminds everyone involved what real support looks like. While Marcus was planning in the comfort of his study, Linda was preparing for the meeting that would determine her professional future. She'd chosen her best outfit, a simple navy blue dress that she'd bought for her husband's funeral 3 years earlier. It was the most professional thing she owned, though she knew it couldn't compete with the expensive suits worn by the hospital administrators. Sophia had insisted on helping her mother get ready, treating the meeting like it was a job interview rather than a disciplinary hearing. "Mom, you look perfect," Sophia said, adjusting Linda's collar. "Just remember that you saved someone's life. That has to count for something." "I hope so, sweetheart. But sometimes doing the right thing isn't enough in the world of hospital politics." Sophia's expression grew serious. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If you had to make the same decision again, knowing what you know now about the consequences, would you still save that little boy?" Linda didn't hesitate. "Yes, every time." "Then you have nothing to be ashamed of. Whatever happens in that meeting, you know you did the right thing." Linda hugged her daughter, drawing strength from the young woman's unwavering support. Sophia had grown up watching her mother make sacrifices for others, first for her father during his illness, then for her patients at the hospital. She understood that integrity sometimes came with a price, but that it was always worth paying. As Linda drove back to the hospital for the meeting, she thought about the strange phone call Patricia had mentioned. She wondered what kind of man Marcus Thornfield was, what had motivated him to involve himself in her situation. Most patients' families were grateful for good care, but they didn't typically challenge hospital administration on behalf of their nurses. She parked in the employee garage and walked through the same entrance she'd used the night before. The security guard, an older man named Frank, who'd always been kind to her, looked up as she passed. "Afternoon, Linda. Heard you had quite a night last shift." "Word travels fast around here." Frank lowered his voice. "Also heard you might be in some trouble for it. That doesn't sit right with me. You're one of the good ones." "Thank you, Frank. That means a lot." As Linda rode the elevator to the administrative floor, she reflected on Frank's words. She'd always tried to treat everyone at the hospital with respect, from the custodial staff to the chief of surgery. It hadn't occurred to her that those relationships might matter now, that the people she'd shown kindness to over the years might be watching to see how she was treated. The elevator doors opened to reveal a floor she rarely visited. The administrative wing was decorated with expensive artwork and plush carpeting, a stark contrast to the functional simplicity of the clinical areas. Linda announced herself to the receptionist and was directed to wait in a small conference room. As she sat alone, reviewing her notes about the previous night's events, Linda tried to calm her nerves. She'd been in difficult meetings before, including the heartbreaking discussions with insurance companies during her husband's illness. She'd learned to advocate for herself and others with quiet determination, never raising her voice, but never backing down from what she believed was right. The door opened and Dr. Caldwell entered, followed by Director Brennan, Dr. Martinez, and legal counsel Warner. Linda stood to greet them, noting the formal atmosphere and the carefully neutral expressions on their faces. "Please have a seat, Linda," Director Brennan said. "Thank you for coming in on your day off. Of course, I understand you need to review what happened last night." Dr. Caldwell opened his folder, but before he could speak, there was a knock on the conference room door. The receptionist peered in apologetically. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Thornfield has arrived for the meeting." Director Brennan straightened in his chair. "Please send him in." Linda turned toward the door, curious to finally meet the man who had somehow become her unexpected advocate. When Marcus Thornfield entered the room, she was struck immediately by his presence. He wasn't particularly tall or imposing physically, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, but what impressed Linda most was his demeanor. Despite his obvious wealth and status, he greeted everyone in the room with genuine courtesy, making eye contact and using their names. When he reached Linda, he paused. "Nurse Rodriguez, I'm Marcus Thornfield. Thank you for saving my son's life." Linda stood and shook his hand. "How is Tommy doing, Mr. Thornfield?" "He's recovering beautifully thanks to your quick thinking and expert care." Marcus took a seat at the conference table, immediately changing the dynamic of the room. What had been a disciplinary hearing was now something else entirely, though Linda wasn't quite sure what. Director Brennan cleared his throat. "Mr. Thornfield, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about last night's incident." "It's not an incident," Marcus replied calmly. "It's a life-saving medical intervention performed by a highly skilled nurse under emergency conditions." Dr. Caldwell attempted to regain control of the narrative. "Mr. Thornfield, while we're all grateful for the positive outcome, there are important protocols and procedures that must be followed to ensure patient safety." Marcus turned his attention to Dr. Caldwell with the focused intensity of a man accustomed to cutting through bureaucratic nonsense. "Dr. Caldwell, let me ask you a question. If your child was dying in front of you, and a qualified medical professional could save their life but needed to bend some administrative rules to do it, what would you want that person to do?" Dr. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. "That's a hypothetical situation that doesn't address the real issues involved." "The real issue," Marcus continued, "is that you have a nurse who made a split-second decision that saved a life, and rather than celebrating her courage and skill, you're considering punishing her for it." Legal counsel Warner intervened. "Mr. Thornfield, the hospital has to consider liability issues and regulatory compliance." Marcus smiled, but there was steel behind it. "Mr. Warner, I've been dealing with liability and regulatory compliance for 30 years. Let me tell you, what creates real liability? Failing to support the people who do the right thing under pressure." He turned to Dr. Martinez. "Doctor, from a medical standpoint, was Nurse Rodriguez's intervention appropriate?" Dr. Martinez nodded. "Absolutely. Given the circumstances, her actions were not only appropriate, but necessary. And the procedure she performed, Is she qualified to perform it? Yes, her training and experience more than qualify her for that intervention. Marcus looked around the table. So we have a qualified nurse who performed an appropriate medical procedure that saved a child's life, and the question is whether she should be disciplined for it. The silence that followed was telling. Linda watched the interplay between Marcus and the administrators, realizing that this man possessed a kind of power that went far beyond wealth. He had the ability to frame arguments in ways that made opposition seem unreasonable. Director Brennan finally spoke. Mr. Thornfield, what outcome are you hoping for in this situation? Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering his response carefully. I want Nurse Rodriguez to be recognized for the exemplary care she provided. I want the hospital to acknowledge that she acted appropriately under difficult circumstances. And I want to ensure that other nurses in similar situations feel empowered to make life-saving decisions without fear of retribution. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. But more than that, I want to discuss how we can better support nurses like Linda Rodriguez, who represent the very best of what healthcare should be. Linda listened to this exchange with growing amazement. She'd expected to defend her actions, to argue for her job, to face the consequences of her decision alone. Instead, she found herself at the center of a much larger conversation about healthcare, institutional values, and the treatment of frontline medical workers. Marcus turned to her directly. Linda, would you mind telling us why you became a nurse? The question caught her off guard. I wanted to help people, to make a difference when they were at their most vulnerable. And in 12 years of nursing, how many lives would you estimate you've saved or significantly improved? Linda considered this. I don't really think about it in those terms. Each patient is important, whether it's something minor or life-threatening. That's exactly my point, Marcus said, addressing the room. You have a nurse who doesn't see herself as a hero, who simply does her job with extraordinary skill and compassion. The question is whether this institution values that kind of person. Dr. Caldwell made one last attempt to assert his position. Mr. Thornfield, we do value our nurses, but we also have to maintain standards and protocols. Marcus's response was measured but firm. Dr. Caldwell, standards and protocols exist to support good patient care, not to prevent it. When they conflict with saving lives, the choice should be obvious. He stood, signaling that the meeting was reaching its conclusion. I'd like to propose that instead of disciplinary action, this incident be used as a case study for how nurses should respond to emergency situations. Linda Rodriguez should be commended, not condemned. Director Brennan looked around the table at his colleagues, reading the situation correctly. We'll certainly take that recommendation under serious consideration. Marcus handed his business card to each person at the table. I'll be very interested to hear about your decision. In the meantime, I want you to know that the Thornfield Foundation will be closely monitoring how this situation is resolved. As the meeting concluded, Linda found herself walking out of the building beside Marcus Thornfield. She was still processing what had just happened, still trying to understand how her simple act of doing her job had led to this moment. Mr. Thornfield, she said as they reached the parking garage, I don't know how to thank you for what you just did in there. Marcus stopped and turned to face her. Linda, you don't need to thank me. You saved my son's life. If anything, I should be thanking you. But you didn't have to get involved in my situation with the hospital. Most people would have just been grateful and moved on. Marcus smiled, and for the first time Linda saw the man behind the powerful exterior. Most people didn't grow up understanding that with privilege comes responsibility. You used your skills and training to help my family when we needed it most. Now it's my turn to help you." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Linda, I've learned a lot about your situation today, about your service to our country, your dedication to your patients, the sacrifices you've made for your family. I want you to know that you're not alone anymore." Linda felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness from this near stranger. "I don't understand." "You will," Marcus said gently. "Tomorrow, I want you to come to work, as you normally would, but I think you'll find that things are going to be different." As Marcus walked away, Linda stood in the parking garage, her mind racing with questions. What had he meant about things being different? What had he learned about her situation? And why did she have the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine? She drove home in a daze, knowing that tomorrow would bring answers to questions she didn't even know how to ask. Linda arrived at Riverside General Hospital the next morning, expecting another routine shift, though her conversation with Marcus Thornfield had left her with a sense of anticipation. She couldn't quite explain. She'd spent the previous evening trying to process everything that had happened, from Tommy's emergency to the unexpected meeting with hospital administration. Sophia had peppered her with questions about the mysterious billionaire who had taken such an interest in her mother's situation, but Linda had few answers to give. As she pulled into the employee parking garage, Linda noticed something unusual. Several black vehicles were parked near the main entrance, the kind of official-looking SUVs that suggested important visitors. She wondered if the hospital was hosting some kind of VIP event or board meeting, though she couldn't recall any announcements about special activities. Walking through the main lobby, Linda was surprised to see increased security presence. Frank, the regular security guard, was at his usual post, but there were several other uniformed personnel stationed around the entrance. Frank caught her eye and gave her a knowing smile, but before she could stop to ask what was happening, her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Linda, report to the executive conference room immediately. Don't ask questions, just come up." Linda's stomach dropped. Had something gone wrong with yesterday's meeting? Was this the moment when Dr. Caldwell's disciplinary action would finally be implemented? She took the elevator to the administrative floor with growing anxiety, trying to prepare herself for whatever was coming. The executive floor was bustling with activity that seemed unusual for early morning. Hospital administrators were moving purposefully through the corridors, and there was an energy in the air that suggested something significant was happening. Linda announced herself to the receptionist, who directed her not to the small conference room where yesterday's meeting had taken place, but to the hospital's main boardroom. When Linda entered the room, she was stunned by what she saw. The long conference table was occupied by people she recognized as the hospital's senior leadership, including Director Brennan, Dr. Martinez, and several board members she'd only seen in photographs. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thornfield, dressed in another impeccably tailored suit, but what struck Linda most was his expression of quiet satisfaction. "Linda, please come in," Director Brennan said, standing as she entered. "We have some important news to share with you." Linda took the seat indicated for her, directly across from Marcus, who nodded in greeting but remained silent. The formal atmosphere was intimidating, but there was something different about it from yesterday's meeting. The tension was gone, replaced by something that felt almost celebratory. Dr. Martinez spoke first. "Linda, after careful review of the events from 2 nights ago and consultation with our medical staff and external experts, we've reached some important conclusions." Linda braced herself, unsure whether this was good news or bad. "Your actions in treating Tommy Thornfield were not only appropriate, but exemplary. You demonstrated exactly the kind of clinical judgment and patient advocacy that we want to see from our nursing staff." Linda felt a wave of relief wash over her, but Dr. Martinez wasn't finished. "Furthermore, we've decided that your case should serve as a model for how our nurses should respond to emergency situations. Rather than disciplinary action, we're implementing a new protocol that specifically protects nurses who make appropriate life-saving decisions under pressure. Director Brennan took over. Linda, we're also pleased to announce that you've been selected for immediate promotion to senior emergency nurse, with a corresponding increase in salary and benefits. Linda stared at him in disbelief. I don't understand. Yesterday, Dr. Caldwell was talking about disciplinary action. Yesterday, we were operating under incomplete information, Brennan replied diplomatically. Today, we have a fuller picture of your qualifications, your service record, and your value to this institution. Marcus finally spoke. Linda, what Director Brennan isn't telling you is that the Thornfield Foundation has made a substantial grant to Riverside General specifically to fund a new nursing excellence program. You've been selected as the first recipient of the Linda Rodriguez Nursing Excellence Award. The room fell silent as Linda processed this information. An award named after her, a foundation grant. The magnitude of what was happening began to dawn on her, and she felt overwhelmed by the generosity and scope of Marcus's intervention. I don't know what to say, Linda whispered. There's more, Marcus continued, his voice gentle, but carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making life-changing announcements. The foundation has also established a scholarship fund for the children of healthcare workers. Your daughter, Sophia, has been awarded a full 4-year scholarship to any university of her choice, including living expenses and study abroad opportunities. Linda's hands flew to her mouth as tears began to flow freely. Sophia's future, the burden that had weighed so heavily on her mind for years, had just been lifted with a few simple words. Her daughter would have the opportunities that Linda had always dreamed of, but never thought possible. Mr. Thornfield, I can't accept this. It's too much. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. Linda, my son is alive because you were willing to risk your career to save him. No amount of money can repay that debt, but I can ensure that your sacrifice doesn't go unrecognized. Dr. Martinez added, the scholarship isn't charity, Linda. Sophia earned it with her academic achievements. The foundation simply recognized what was already there. Director Brennan cleared his throat. There's one more announcement. As part of our new Nursing Excellence Initiative, we're restructuring the emergency department leadership. Dr. Caldwell has been reassigned to other duties, and we're promoting Patricia Hayes to Emergency Department Nursing Director. You'll be working directly under her supervision. Linda felt another wave of relief. Patricia had been her advocate and mentor, and the thought of continuing to work under someone who respected her clinical judgment was deeply comforting. When does all of this take effect? Linda asked, still struggling to process the rapid sequence of changes. Immediately, Brennan replied. Your new salary and position are effective today, and the Nursing Excellence Program launches next week with a formal ceremony recognizing your achievement. Marcus stood, signaling that the official portion of the meeting was concluding. Linda, I wonder if you'd join me for a brief walk. There's something else I'd like to show you. Still in a daze from the morning's revelations, Linda followed Marcus out of the boardroom and toward the elevator. As they descended to the main floor, he explained that the Thornfield Foundation's support extended beyond the announcements that had just been made. We've been working with the hospital to address some of the systemic issues that led to your situation, Marcus said as they walked through the lobby. Budget cuts and understaffing shouldn't force good nurses to choose between following protocol and saving lives. They exited through the main entrance, where Linda immediately noticed the increased activity she'd observed earlier. The black SUVs were arranged in a precise formation, and she could see uniformed personnel maintaining a security perimeter around the hospital's front plaza. "Mr. Thornfield, what's happening out here?" Marcus smiled, the expression carrying the satisfaction of a plan coming together perfectly. "Linda, I want you to understand something about respect and recognition. Sometimes grand gestures are necessary to ensure that important messages are clearly received." As they walked toward the center of the plaza, Linda became aware that people were watching from the windows of the hospital. Staff members, patients, and visitors had gathered to observe whatever was happening outside. She felt self-conscious being at the center of so much attention, but Marcus's calm confidence was reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus called out, his voice carrying easily across the plaza, despite its conversational tone, "I want to tell you about a nurse named Linda Rodriguez." Linda realized with growing amazement that Marcus was addressing not just the people gathered outside, but also those watching from the hospital windows. This was a public recognition, a statement being made in front of the entire hospital community. 2 nights ago, this woman saved my son's life. She put her training, her experience, and her career on the line to ensure that an 8-year-old boy would go home to his family. She acted with courage, skill, and compassion in a moment when those qualities meant the difference between life and death. The crowd had grown as Marcus spoke, with people emerging from the hospital and gathering in the plaza. Linda could see familiar faces among them, colleagues who had worked alongside her for years, patients she had cared for, support staff who had shared brief conversations during long shifts. "But here's what makes Linda Rodriguez truly exceptional," Marcus continued. "She didn't do any of this for recognition or reward. She did it because it was the right thing to do. She saw a child in need, and she acted. That's the kind of person we should all aspire to be." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Linda noticed several of her nursing colleagues nodding in recognition of the truth in Marcus's words. The Thornfield Foundation believes in supporting people who embody the best of human compassion and professional excellence. Today, we're announcing a new partnership with Riverside General Hospital to ensure that healthcare workers like Linda Rodriguez receive the recognition and support they deserve. Marcus gestured toward the formation of vehicles, and Linda watched in amazement as the rear doors of several SUVs opened simultaneously. Instead of the government officials or business executives she might have expected, out stepped a group of people in military dress uniforms. "Linda, I'd like you to meet some colleagues of yours," Marcus said. "These are members of the Army Medical Corps, veterans who served alongside nurses like you in combat zones around the world." The military personnel approached in formation, their bearing precise and respectful. Linda recognized the insignia and realized these weren't just any soldiers, but medical professionals who understood exactly what it meant to make life or death decisions under pressure. Colonel David Sterling, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes, stepped forward and saluted Linda. "Nurse Rodriguez, on behalf of the United States Army Medical Corps, we want to honor your service to our country and your continued dedication to saving lives as a civilian." Linda returned the salute, her military training taking over despite her civilian clothes and the surreal nature of the situation. "Thank you, Colonel. It's an honor." "Nurse Rodriguez, your actions 2 nights ago exemplify the same courage and skill that military medics demonstrate in combat. You saw a critical situation, assessed the need, and acted decisively to save a life. That's what we do, whether in a trauma bay or on a battlefield." The colonel reached into his jacket and withdrew a formal certificate. "The Army Medical Corps wants to present you with a Civilian Medal of Merit, recognizing your exceptional service and the honor you bring to military medical training." Linda accepted the certificate with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the recognition from her former colleagues in uniform. Around her, the crowd had grown larger, and she could hear applause beginning to build. Marcus stepped forward again. "But we're not finished yet, Linda. The Thornfield Foundation believes that recognition should be matched with practical support." He gestured toward the largest of the SUVs, and Linda watched as the rear doors opened to reveal something completely unexpected. Instead of more officials or equipment, the vehicle contained furniture, electronics, and household items, all clearly new and carefully arranged. "Your research into my situation," Linda said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn. "The Foundation did comprehensive research into the circumstances of all our scholarship recipients," Marcus replied, diplomatically. "We believe in addressing not just educational needs, but also the broader challenges that families face." A team of movers emerged from behind the vehicles, and Linda realized they were preparing to deliver everything she was seeing. New furniture to replace the second-hand pieces she'd been making do with, a laptop computer for Sophia's college preparation, household appliances to replace the ones that had been failing, but which she couldn't afford to fix. "Mr. Thornfield, this is too much. I can't accept all of this." Marcus's expression grew serious. "Linda, let me ask you something. When you saw my son choking, did you hesitate because helping him might have been too much?" "No, of course not." "Then don't hesitate now. This isn't charity, it's recognition. It's a community saying that people who risk everything to help others deserve to be supported in return." Patricia Hayes appeared at Linda's side, having made her way through the crowd. Her face was bright with joy and pride as she witnessed her colleague receiving such extraordinary recognition. "Linda, this is incredible," Patricia said, embracing her friend. "The whole hospital is talking about it. Everyone's so proud of you." Linda looked around at the crowd that had gathered, seeing faces from every department of the hospital. Custodial staff stood next to surgeons, administrative assistants next to respiratory therapists. The normal hierarchies of the hospital had dissolved in this moment of shared celebration. Dr. Martinez approached the group, her professional demeanor softened by genuine emotion. "Linda, I want you to know that your story is already being used in our nursing orientation program. New hires will learn about the Linda Rodriguez standard, the expectation that our nurses will always put patient care first, even when it requires courage." Linda felt the weight of that responsibility, the knowledge that her actions had created something larger than just one emergency intervention. Other nurses would be expected to live up to the example she had set, and future patients would benefit from the precedent that had been established. Frank, the security guard, who had always been kind to her, approached with a group of support staff. "Linda, we've all been talking, and we want you to know how proud we are to work with someone like you. You represent the best of what this hospital stands for." The recognition from her everyday colleagues meant as much to Linda as the formal presentations from hospital leadership and military officials. These were the people who saw her every day, who knew her as a person rather than just a professional reputation. Marcus raised his hand to address the crowd once more. "Before we conclude this ceremony, I want to make one final announcement. The Thornfield Foundation is establishing a permanent fund to support the families of healthcare workers who go above and beyond in their service to others. This fund will ensure that acts of courage and compassion are rewarded rather than punished." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing off the hospital buildings and carrying the weight of genuine appreciation from people who understood the significance of what was being announced. As the formal ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus pulled Linda aside for a private conversation. "How are you feeling about all of this?" he asked, his voice showing genuine concern for her emotional state. "Overwhelmed, grateful, and a little scared," Linda admitted. "My life just changed completely in the span of an hour. I'm not sure how to process it all." That's completely understandable. Change is always challenging, even when it's positive change. Linda looked back at the hospital, thinking about all the years she'd struggled to balance patient care with financial pressures, professional demands, with personal responsibilities. "Mr. Thornfield, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you do all of this? I mean, I understand being grateful that Tommy is okay, but this goes so far beyond gratitude." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Linda, I've been successful in business because I understand value when I see it. You represent something that's becoming increasingly rare in our world, genuine compassion combined with exceptional skill. When I see that kind of value being underappreciated or threatened, I feel compelled to act." He paused, looking up at the hospital windows where people were still watching. "But there's more to it than that. My son saw something in you that, something beyond your medical skills. He saw kindness in a moment when he was scared and vulnerable. That's the kind of person I want him to remember, the kind of example I want him to learn from." Linda nodded, understanding that this recognition was as much about the values Marcus wanted to instill in his son as it was about rewarding her actions. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket and withdrawing an envelope. "This is a personal note from Tommy. He insisted on writing it himself." Linda opened the envelope with trembling hands and found a hand-drawn card showing a stick-figure nurse with a stethoscope standing next to a smiling boy. The message, written in careful 8-year-old handwriting, read, "Thank you for saving my life, Nurse Linda. You are my hero. Love, Tommy." Tears flowed freely as Linda read the simple message, understanding that this child's gratitude was worth more than all the formal recognition and financial support combined. "Will you tell Tommy that he's my hero too?" Linda asked. "It takes courage to trust someone when you're scared, and he showed that courage." "I'll tell him," Marcus promised, "and I have a feeling you'll have the chance to tell him yourself. He's been asking when he can see the nurse who helped him." As Linda prepared to return to work, now carrying the title of senior emergency nurse and the knowledge that her daughter's future was secure, she reflected on the strange turns that life could take. 2 nights ago, she had been a struggling single mother working the night shift, worried about bills and uncertain about the future. Today, she was being celebrated as a hero and given opportunities she had never dared to dream of. But as she walked back into the hospital, Linda knew that the most important thing hadn't changed. She was still a nurse, still committed to caring for people in their moments of greatest need. The recognition and support were wonderful, but her true satisfaction would continue to come from the work itself, from the knowledge that she was making a difference in people's lives. Patricia was waiting for her at the elevator, practically bouncing with excitement. "Linda, you realize what just happened out there, don't you? You've become a symbol for every nurse who's ever wondered if anyone notices or cares about the work we do." "I just did my job, Patricia." "Exactly. And now everyone knows what doing your job really means. You've shown them that nursing isn't just a profession. It's a calling that requires courage, skill, and the willingness to put others before yourself." As they rode the elevator back to the emergency department, Linda thought about the patients who would be arriving throughout the day, people who needed care, comfort, and sometimes life-saving intervention. She was the same nurse she had been that morning, but now she carried the weight of example, the knowledge that other healthcare workers would look to her story for inspiration. The emergency department felt different when she returned, though nothing physical had changed. The same equipment filled the same spaces, the same fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the same challenges of caring for sick and injured people remained. But there was a new energy in the air, a sense that important changes were taking place. Dr. Caldwell was noticeably absent from his usual post, and Linda learned that he had been reassigned to administrative duties that would keep him away from direct patient care decisions. The nursing staff seemed more relaxed, more confident, as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Angela Park approached Linda's station with obvious excitement. "Linda, everyone's talking about what happened outside. Is it true that you got promoted and your daughter got a college scholarship?" "It's true, though I'm still trying to process it all." "This is so amazing. You deserve every bit of recognition you're getting. We all know how hard you work and how much you care about your patients." Diane Foster, another colleague, joined the conversation. "Linda, I want you to know that watching what happened to you has changed how I think about my job. If nurses like you can be recognized and supported for doing the right thing, maybe there's hope for all of us." Linda realized that the impact of the morning's events extended far beyond her personal situation. Other nurses were seeing that excellence could be rewarded, that taking risks for patient care could lead to recognition rather than punishment. The culture of the emergency department was already beginning to shift. Her first patient of the day was an elderly man with chest pains, a routine presentation that she'd handled hundreds of times before. But as she worked through the assessment and treatment protocol, Linda was aware that her colleagues were watching with new interest, seeing her actions through the lens of her recent recognition. The patient, Mr. Williams, was obviously frightened and in pain, looking around the busy emergency department with confusion and anxiety. Linda sat beside his stretcher and took his hand, speaking in the same gentle voice she'd always used with scared patients. "Mr. Williams, I'm Linda, and I'm going to be taking care of you today. We're going to run some tests to figure out what's causing your chest pain, and I want you to know that you're in good hands." The man's grip tightened on her hand. "I've been having these pains for days, but I didn't want to bother anyone. My wife finally made me come in." "You did the right thing by coming in, and your wife sounds very wise. Chest pain is something we always take seriously, and I'm glad you're here where we can help you." As Linda worked with Mr. Williams, explaining each procedure and medication, providing comfort along with clinical care, she was reminded of why she had become a nurse in the first place. The recognition and awards were wonderful, but this connection with people in their moments of need was what truly mattered. The day continued with its usual mix of emergencies and routine care, but Linda noticed that something had fundamentally changed in how she was perceived by both colleagues and patients. Word of the morning ceremony had spread throughout the hospital, and people treated her with a new level of respect and appreciation. But perhaps more importantly, Linda noticed changes in her colleagues. Nurses were standing a little straighter, taking more time with patients, showing increased confidence in their clinical decision-making. The Linda Rodriguez standard was already having an impact, inspiring others to strive for the same level of excellence and patient advocacy. As her shift neared its end, Linda received a text message from Sophia. "Mom, the school counselor called me to her office today. She said a foundation contacted them about a scholarship. Is this real? Did something amazing happen?" Linda smiled as she typed her response. "Something very amazing happened, sweetheart. We'll talk about it when I get home. Get ready for some very good news about your future." Patricia approached as Linda was preparing to leave. "How was your first day as senior emergency nurse?" "Different, but good. I think I'm starting to understand the responsibility that comes with this recognition." "You're going to handle it beautifully, Linda. You always have." As Linda walked through the hospital lobby toward the parking garage, she passed the spot where the morning ceremony had taken place. The vehicles were gone. The crowd had dispersed, but the memory of that extraordinary moment remained vivid in her mind. She thought about Marcus Thornfield and his son Tommy, about the chain of events that had led from a choking emergency to this complete transformation of her circumstances. She thought about the military colleagues who had honored her service, the hospital administrators who had finally recognized her value, and the nursing colleagues who were inspired by her example. But most of all, she thought about Sophia and the future that was now possible for her daughter. College, graduate school, career opportunities that had seemed impossible just days before were now within reach. The cycle of financial struggle that had dominated Linda's adult life would end with her, giving Sophia the chance to build something better. Driving home through the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, Linda reflected on the strange and wonderful way that life could change in an instant. 2 nights ago, she had made a split-second decision to save a child's life, never imagining the consequences that would follow. Today, she was driving home as a recognized hero, a promoted professional, and a mother whose daughter's dreams were about to come true. The house was still the same modest structure she'd been struggling to maintain, but even that would change soon with the foundation's support. Sophia would have the resources she needed for college preparation, and Linda would have the financial security to focus on her patients rather than her bills. As she pulled into her driveway, Linda saw Sophia waiting at the front door, clearly excited to hear about the day's events. The conversation they were about to have would mark the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, a future filled with possibilities that had seemed impossible just days before. Linda Rodriguez had always believed that doing the right thing was its own reward. Today, she had learned that sometimes the universe agreed, and that acts of courage and compassion could create ripples of change that extended far beyond their original moment. The nurse who had saved a billionaire's son had discovered that her own life and the lives of countless others could be saved in return. Part 4. The military convoy arrives. The morning of Linda's 3rd day as senior emergency nurse began like any other, with the familiar routine of checking patient assignments and reviewing overnight reports. She was still adjusting to her new responsibilities, which included mentoring junior nurses and serving as a liaison between the nursing staff and hospital administration. The promotion had come with increased respect from colleagues, but also with the weight of knowing that others looked to her as an example of nursing excellence. Linda was reviewing charts in the break room when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Marcus Thornfield. "Linda, I need you to be prepared for something extraordinary today. Tommy has been asking to see you, and I've arranged for a special visit. Trust me on this." Before she could respond, Patricia Hayes burst into the break room, her eyes wide with excitement and confusion. "Linda, you need to see what's happening outside. There are military vehicles everywhere." Linda followed Patricia to the windows overlooking the hospital's main entrance, and what she saw took her breath away. The parking area was filled with olive-green military vehicles arranged in precise formation. Humvees, transport trucks, and what appeared to be mobile command units created an impressive display of military precision and power. "What do you think is happening?" Patricia asked, her voice filled with curiosity and concern. "I have no idea," Linda replied, though Marcus's message suggested this somehow involved her. The sight of so many military vehicles brought back memories of her own service, the sense of purpose and camaraderie that had defined her time as an army medic. Dr. Martinez appeared beside them, equally puzzled by the scene unfolding outside. "I've called security, but they say the vehicles have proper authorization to be here. Apparently, this is some kind of official visit related to veteran services." Linda's phone rang, and she recognized Marcus's number immediately. "Linda, are you seeing the activity outside?" "Yes, what's going on?" "Tommy wanted to thank you properly for saving his life, and I thought it was important to show him what real gratitude looks like. Can you come outside? There are some people who want to meet you." Linda made her way through the hospital corridors, which buzzed with excited conversation as staff members discussed the military presence. Patients and visitors clustered around windows, trying to get a better view of the vehicles and personnel outside. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and curiosity. As Linda approached the main entrance, she could see that the military presence was even more impressive up close. The vehicles were pristine, their occupants moving with the disciplined precision she remembered from her own military service. This wasn't just a casual visit, it was a full-scale operation designed to make a powerful statement. Marcus Thornfield stood near the central formation of vehicles, dressed in a dark suit but wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Beside him stood Tommy, looking healthy and energetic, his eyes bright with anticipation as he scanned the hospital entrance. "Nurse Linda!" Tommy called out as soon as he spotted her, running toward her with the enthusiasm of a child who had been waiting for this moment. Linda knelt to embrace the boy, overwhelmed by the joy of seeing him fully recovered from the emergency that had brought them together. "Tommy, you look wonderful. How are you feeling?" "I'm all better, thanks to you. Dad says you're a hero, and I wanted to show you something special." Marcus approached, his smile warm, but carrying the satisfaction of someone whose carefully planned surprise was about to unfold. "Linda, Tommy insisted that we do something to properly thank you for saving his life. I've arranged for some of your former colleagues to join us today." The rear doors of the Central Command vehicle opened, and Linda watched in amazement as uniformed personnel began to emerge. These weren't just any soldiers. She could see from their insignia and bearing that they were medical corps personnel, people who understood exactly what it meant to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. Colonel David Sterling, whom she had met during the previous ceremony, stepped forward with a formal bearing that commanded immediate respect. "Nurse Rodriguez, thank you for joining us today. We have something very special planned." Behind the colonel, Linda recognized faces that made her heart skip a beat. These weren't strangers in uniform. They were people she had served with during her deployments to Afghanistan. Medics, nurses, and doctors who had worked alongside her in field hospitals and forward operating bases, sharing the intense bonds that form between people who saved lives together under combat conditions. "Linda Rodriguez, you magnificent woman," called out Master Sergeant Maria Santos, a combat medic who had been Linda's closest friend during their overseas deployment. "Look at you, still saving lives and making the rest of us look bad." Linda felt tears welling up as she embraced Maria, overcome by the unexpected reunion with someone who had shared some of the most challenging and meaningful experiences of her life. "Maria, what are you doing here? How did you even know about this?" "Your new friend, Mr. Thornfield, tracked down everyone from our old unit who's still in active service. Turns out, word spreads fast when one of our own makes headlines for heroic medical intervention." More familiar faces emerged from the vehicles, each one representing a different chapter of Linda's military service. There was Captain Jennifer Walsh, a nurse practitioner who had mentored Linda during her early days as a medic. Staff Sergeant Robert Kim, a physician's assistant who had worked countless overnight shifts alongside her in field hospitals. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a trauma surgeon who had taught Linda advanced emergency procedures that had served her well in civilian practice. "Linda, we couldn't let this moment pass without recognizing what you've accomplished," Colonel Sterling announced, his voice carrying easily across the gathering crowd of hospital staff and onlookers. "When we heard about your recent actions, we knew we had to be here to honor not just what you did, but what you represent." Tommy tugged on Linda's scrubs, his excitement bubbling over. "Nurse Linda, Dad told me that you were a soldier like these people. He said you helped save people, in the war too." Linda knelt beside Tommy again, touched by his understanding of her service. "I was a medic, which means I took care of soldiers who got hurt, just like I took care of you. That's so cool. Dad says that makes you extra special because you've been saving people for a really long time. Marcus stepped forward, addressing not just Linda, but the crowd of hospital personnel who had gathered to witness this extraordinary scene. Ladies and gentlemen, Linda Rodriguez represents the very best of military and civilian medical service. She's someone who has dedicated her life to caring for others, whether on battlefields overseas or in emergency rooms here at home. Colonel Sterling opened a formal document case and withdrew an ornate certificate. Nurse Rodriguez, on behalf of the United States Army Medical Corps, and in recognition of your continued service to the ideals of military medicine, we're presenting you with the Army Medical Corps Distinguished Service Recognition. The crowd erupted in applause as Linda accepted the certificate, her hands shaking with emotion. This wasn't just recognition from her current colleagues, but acknowledgement from the military community that had shaped her professional identity and instilled in her the values that guided her nursing practice. "But we're not finished," Colonel Sterling continued. "Your former unit wanted to do something special to honor your service and your recent heroic actions." Master Sergeant Santos stepped forward with a folded American flag, the kind presented to honor fallen service members or to recognize exceptional service. "Linda, this flag was flown over our base in Afghanistan during our last deployment together. We saved it, thinking someday we'd find the right moment to honor someone who embodied everything we believed in about military medical service." Linda accepted the flag with trembling hands, understanding the profound significance of the gesture. This wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of shared sacrifice, mutual respect, and the bonds that connected people who had served together. "In dangerous places, far from home, you carried our values from the battlefield to the civilian world," Santos continued. "You never stopped being a warrior for life, never stopped putting yourself at risk to save others. This flag belongs with someone who understands what service really means." Tommy watched the ceremony with wide eyes, clearly impressed by the formal recognition his friend was receiving. "Dad, why is everyone crying?" he whispered, though his voice carried in the emotional silence that had settled over the gathering. "Sometimes people cry when they're very happy and proud," Marcus replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "All of these people are proud of Nurse Linda, just like we are." Captain Walsh stepped forward with another presentation case. "Linda, we also wanted to give you something practical. This is a complete advanced trauma kit, the kind we use in field hospitals. We thought you might want to have it available for situations where standard emergency equipment isn't sufficient." Linda opened the case to reveal medical supplies and instruments that were far more sophisticated than anything typically available in civilian emergency departments. The kit represented not just tools, but the trust of her former colleagues in her ability to use them appropriately. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell addressed the crowd of hospital personnel who had gathered to witness the ceremony. "I want all of you to understand what kind of person you work with. Linda Rodriguez didn't just save your patient the other night. She demonstrated the same courage and skill that made her invaluable to our unit in Afghanistan." She turned back to Linda. "In combat, we learned to recognize people who could be trusted with lives, who would make the hard decisions when everything was on the line. You were one of those people then, and you're clearly still one of those people now." Dr. Martinez, who had been watching from the hospital entrance, approached the group with obvious emotion. "On behalf of Riverside General Hospital, I want to thank all of you for this recognition of our colleague. Linda represents everything we aspire to be as healthcare professionals." Patricia Hayes had made her way through the crowd and stood beside Linda, beaming with pride at seeing her friend receive such extraordinary recognition. Linda, I hope you realize how special this is. How many people have entire military units show up to honor them? Tommy had been listening to all the speeches with the attention span impressive for an 8-year-old, but now he had something important to say. "Excuse me, everyone, I want to say something too." The crowd quieted as the small boy stepped forward, his serious expression showing that he understood the importance of the moment. "I know I'm just a kid, but I want to thank all of you for being friends with Nurse Linda. She saved my life, and that's the most important thing anyone has ever done for me. My dad says that when someone saves your life, you owe them forever. And that's okay with me because Nurse Linda is the best person I know." He turned to Linda with the earnest expression that only children can manage. "Nurse Linda, I drew you another picture, but this one is special because it shows you as a soldier and a nurse. Dad helped me understand that you've been a hero for a long time, not just when you helped me." Tommy handed Linda a carefully folded piece of paper, which she opened to reveal a drawing that, while executed with childish enthusiasm, clearly depicted a figure in military uniform standing next to the same figure in hospital scrubs. Above both figures, he had written in careful block letters, "My hero, Nurse Linda." The crowd erupted in applause again, but this time it carried a different quality, the warmth of people who had been touched by a child's innocent gratitude and honest emotion. Marcus stepped forward to address the gathering one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we came here today to honor someone who represents the very best of human compassion and professional excellence. But I think we've all learned something about the kind of recognition that truly matters." He gestured toward his son, who was still standing proudly beside Linda. "Tommy reminded us that heroism isn't about titles or ceremonies. It's about people who put others first, who risk everything to help someone in need, who carry the values of service and sacrifice into every aspect of their lives." Colonel Sterling called the military personnel to attention, and they rendered a formal salute to Linda. The gesture was crisp, precise, and filled with the respect that soldiers show to someone who has earned their admiration through action rather than rank. Linda returned the salute, her own military bearing evident despite her civilian clothes. For a moment, she was transported back to her days in uniform, remembering the pride and purpose that had defined her military service. As the formal ceremony concluded, the military personnel began the process of preparing to depart, but not before each of them took time to personally greet Linda and share memories of their service together. The conversations were filled with references to shared experiences, inside jokes, and the kind of camaraderie that only develops between people who have faced danger together. Master Sergeant Santos pulled Linda aside for a private conversation. "Linda, I want you to know how proud I am of what you've accomplished. When we served together, I knew you were special, but seeing how you've carried our values into civilian life makes me incredibly proud to have served with you." "Thank you, Maria. That means more to me than you know." "Listen, we've been talking, and we want you to know that you've got a whole network of support out there. Veterans who understand what service means, who respect what you've done, and who will be there if you ever need anything." Linda felt overwhelmed by the sense of connection and support, realizing that her military service had created bonds that extended far beyond her years in uniform. Captain Walsh joined the conversation. "Linda, we've also been discussing something else. There are a lot of veterans transitioning to civilian healthcare careers who could benefit from mentorship from someone like you. Would you be interested in participating in a program that helps former military medical personnel adjust to civilian practice?" The opportunity to help other veterans navigate the transition she had made years earlier appealed to Linda immediately. "I'd be very interested in that. It was challenging for me, and I imagine it's challenging for others too." "Excellent. We'll be in touch about how to set that up." As the military vehicles prepared to depart, Tommy insisted on personally thanking each of the uniformed personnel for coming to honor his friend. His enthusiasm and genuine gratitude charmed everyone he spoke with, and Linda could see that his father's lessons about recognizing and appreciating service were taking root. Marcus approached Linda as the convoy prepared to leave. "How are you feeling about all of this?" "Overwhelmed, grateful, and a little emotional," Linda admitted. "Seeing my old unit being recognized by my former colleagues, it brings back a lot of memories and emotions." "Good memories, I hope." "Mostly, yes. Memories of purpose, of being part of something larger than myself, of working with people who shared the same commitment to saving lives." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly what I hoped Tommy would see today. I want him to understand that heroes aren't just characters in movies. They're real people who make difficult choices to help others." Tommy ran up to join their conversation, still buzzing with excitement from the day's events. "Dad, can we invite Nurse Linda to dinner sometime? I want to hear more stories about when she was a soldier." "I think that's a wonderful idea, Tommy. What do you say, Linda? Would you and your daughter like to join us for dinner this weekend?" Linda was touched by the invitation, recognizing it as another gesture of genuine friendship rather than mere gratitude. "Sophia would love that. She's been very curious about you both." As the military convoy began to move out, personnel leaning from windows to wave goodbye, Linda stood with Marcus and Tommy watching the impressive procession depart. The hospital staff who had witnessed the ceremony gradually returned to their duties, but the excitement and pride generated by the event would linger for days. Dr. Martinez approached the group as the last vehicles disappeared from view. "Linda, I want you to know that what happened here today will be remembered for a very long time. This hospital has never seen anything like it." "It certainly was unexpected," Linda replied, still processing the magnitude of what had occurred. "More than unexpected. It was transformative. Our staff saw what genuine recognition and support look like. They saw that excellence in nursing can lead to extraordinary acknowledgement from the highest levels." Patricia joined the group, her face still glowing with pride and excitement. "Linda, the entire nursing staff is talking about this. You've become a symbol of what's possible when nurses are truly valued and supported." Linda looked back at the hospital building, thinking about her colleagues who were inside caring for patients, many of whom faced the same challenges she had struggled with for years. "I hope what happened today inspires them to continue providing excellent care, knowing that their efforts are noticed and appreciated." Tommy tugged on her hand. "Nurse Linda, will you tell me stories about being a soldier when we have dinner?" "I'll tell you some stories, Tommy, but I'll also tell you about all the other nurses and doctors and medics who worked with me. Being a hero isn't something you do alone. It's something you do as part of a team." Marcus smiled at Linda's response, recognizing the wisdom and humility that had made her such an effective military medic and such an exceptional civilian nurse. As they prepared to part ways, Linda reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a struggling single mother, worried about her financial future and her daughter's educational opportunities. Today, she stood as a recognized hero, supported by friends she didn't know she had, honored by colleagues from her military past, and secure in the knowledge that her sacrifice and service had not gone unnoticed. But perhaps most importantly, she understood that her story was inspiring others to strive for the same level of excellence and commitment. The Linda Rodriguez Standard had become more than just a policy. It had become a symbol of what healthcare could be when practitioners were supported, recognized, and empowered to put patients first. Walking back into the hospital, Linda knew that her work was far from over. There would be more patients to care for, more emergencies to handle, more opportunities to demonstrate that nursing was both a profession and a calling. But now she carried with her the knowledge that her efforts mattered, that her sacrifice was appreciated, and that she was part of a community that valued courage, compassion, and clinical excellence. The military convoy had departed, but the message they brought would resonate throughout Riverside General Hospital for years to come. Excellence would be recognized, courage would be rewarded, and the people who dedicated their lives to caring for others would know that their service was valued and their sacrifice was honored. 6 months after the extraordinary events that transformed her life, Linda Rodriguez stood in the conference room of the newly established Thornfield Center for Nursing Excellence, watching as the final touches were put on a facility that would change healthcare education forever. The center, housed in a gleaming new building adjacent to Riverside General Hospital, represented everything she had learned about the power of recognition, support, and investment in healthcare professionals. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as Linda reviewed the agenda for the center's grand opening ceremony. As the newly appointed Director of Clinical Excellence, she had spent months working with architects, educators, and healthcare administrators to create a space that would serve as both a training facility and a research center dedicated to advancing nursing practice. Sofia Rodriguez Chen entered the room carrying a stack of programs, her confident stride and professional demeanor reflecting the transformation that college had brought to her life. Now a sophomore at Stanford University studying biomedical engineering with a focus on healthcare innovation, Sofia had embraced the opportunities that Marcus's scholarship had provided with the same determination that had characterized her mother's career. "Mom, the caterers want to know if you're ready for them to start setting up in the main hall," Sofia said, her voice carrying the easy authority of someone who had learned to navigate complex logistics during her internships at medical device companies. "Tell them to go ahead," Linda replied, still amazed by the professional young woman her daughter had become. "How are your final preparations going for your presentation this afternoon?" Sofia had been invited to speak at the opening ceremony about the next generation of healthcare innovation, representing the kind of future that became possible when talented young people received the support they needed to pursue their dreams. "I'm nervous but excited," Sofia admitted. "It's surreal to think that I'm presenting my research to some of the most prominent healthcare leaders in the country." Linda smiled, remembering her own nervousness before important moments in her career. "You've earned the right to be in that room, sweetheart. Your research on portable diagnostic devices could revolutionize emergency care in underserved communities." The project Sofia was working on had grown out of conversations with her mother about the challenges of providing quality healthcare in resource-limited settings. Her engineering background, combined with her understanding of real-world medical needs, had led to innovations that were already attracting attention from major medical device manufacturers. Dr. Patricia Hayes entered the conference room, now serving as the Chief Nursing Officer for the entire Riverside General Hospital system. Her promotion had been part of the broader changes that followed Linda's recognition, as hospital leadership began to understand the value of supporting clinical excellence rather than simply managing costs. "Linda, the speakers are starting to arrive for sound checks," Patricia reported. "Colonel Sterling is here early, and he's brought several colleagues from the Army Medical Corps who want to tour the simulation facilities." The Thornfield Center featured state-of-the-art medical simulation equipment that allowed nursing students and practicing professionals to train on realistic scenarios without risking patient safety. The technology was more advanced than what most medical schools could afford, reflecting Marcus's commitment to providing the best possible resources for healthcare education. "How are our enrollment numbers looking for the first semester?" Linda asked, reviewing the statistics that would be shared during the ceremony. "We're completely booked," Patricia replied with satisfaction. We have nursing students from 12 different universities participating in our clinical rotations, and our continuing education programs have waiting lists stretching into next year. The success of the center had exceeded everyone's expectations, demonstrating that there was tremendous demand for high-quality nursing education and professional development opportunities. The combination of cutting-edge technology, experienced clinical mentors, and a focus on practical skills had created a program that was being studied and replicated by medical institutions across the country. Marcus Thornfield arrived with Tommy, now 9 years old and fascinated by the medical equipment and technology that filled the center. The boy had maintained his friendship with Linda, often visiting the hospital with his father and showing a keen interest in how healthcare professionals did their work. "Nurse Linda!" Tommy called out, running to embrace her as he had during their first reunion. "Dad showed me the pictures of the new machines. Are you really going to teach people how to save lives with robots?" Linda laughed, appreciating Tommy's enthusiastic interpretation of the simulation technology. "Not exactly robots, Tommy, but very sophisticated training equipment that helps nurses and doctors practice taking care of patients." "That's so cool. Can I try it sometime?" Marcus ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "Maybe when you're older, buddy. Right now, let's let the professionals get ready for their big day." He turned to Linda with the warm smile that had characterized their friendship over the past months. "How are you feeling about today?" "Proud, grateful, and ready to get started," Linda replied. "This center represents everything I've learned about what's possible when healthcare professionals are truly supported." The grand opening ceremony had attracted attendees from across the medical community, including hospital administrators, nursing school deans, government officials responsible for healthcare policy, and representatives from major medical foundations. The gathering represented a convergence of people who understood that investing in healthcare education was essential for improving patient outcomes. As guests began to arrive for the ceremony, Linda took a moment to walk through the center's facilities, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The emergency simulation suites were equipped with mannequins that could replicate virtually any medical condition, allowing students to practice complex procedures in a controlled environment. The lecture halls featured the latest audiovisual technology, enabling remote participation from students and professionals around the world. But what impressed Linda most was the center's emphasis on the human elements of healthcare. The curriculum included extensive training on patient communication, cultural sensitivity, and ethical decision-making, recognizing that technical skills were only part of what made healthcare professionals effective. Dr. Susan Martinez, now serving as the hospital system's chief medical officer, joined Linda in the main simulation suite. "Linda, I want you to know how transformative this center is going to be, not just for nursing education, but for the entire healthcare system." "How so?" Linda asked, though she had her own ideas about the center's potential impact. "You've created a model that proves healthcare professionals can be both clinically excellent and financially sustainable. The center is generating revenue through its educational programs while simultaneously improving the quality of care throughout our system." The financial success of the center had been an unexpected but welcome development. By offering premium educational experiences to students and professionals willing to pay for high-quality training, the center had become self-sustaining, while also providing scholarships for students who couldn't afford the full tuition. Captain Jennifer Walsh, now retired from active military service and working as a civilian nurse educator, approached the group with obvious enthusiasm. "Linda, I've been touring the facilities and I'm incredibly impressed. This is exactly the kind of bridge we need between military medical training and civilian healthcare. The center had developed specialized programs for veterans transitioning to civilian healthcare careers, recognizing that military medical personnel brought valuable skills and experience that needed to be adapted rather than replaced. Linda's own experience with this transition had informed the curriculum design, creating pathways that honored military training while addressing the differences in civilian practice. We're seeing remarkable success with our veteran transition programs, Linda reported. 95% of participants are finding positions in civilian healthcare within 6 months of completing their certification. Master Sergeant Maria Santos, who had taken early retirement to join the center's faculty, added, "What makes this program special is that it's designed by people who understand both worlds. Linda knows what it's like to go from military medical service to civilian nursing, and that experience shows in every aspect of the curriculum." As the ceremony's start time approached, Linda made her way to the backstage area where speakers were gathering. The lineup included Colonel Sterling, representing the military medical community, Dr. Martinez, speaking for hospital administrators, a nursing school dean discussing the future of healthcare education, and Sophia, representing the next generation of healthcare innovators. But the keynote speaker was Marcus Thornfield, who would address the broader implications of investing in healthcare excellence and supporting the people who dedicated their lives to caring for others. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked Linda as they prepared to take the stage. "I think so," Linda replied. "It's still surreal to think that all of this started with one emergency call." "It started with your decision to put a patient's life ahead of your own job security," Marcus corrected gently. "Everything else just followed from that moment of courage." The ceremony began with an introduction by Dr. Martinez, who provided context about the partnership between the hospital system and the Thornfield Foundation, and the vision that had led to the center's creation. She emphasized that the facility represented more than just an educational institution. It was a statement about the value society placed on healthcare excellence. Colonel Sterling spoke about the importance of bridging military and civilian medical practice, acknowledging the unique contributions that veterans brought to healthcare while recognizing the need for specialized support during their transition to civilian careers. His remarks highlighted the center's role in honoring military medical service while preparing veterans for new challenges. The nursing school dean discussed the changing landscape of healthcare education, noting that traditional classroom-based learning was being supplemented by sophisticated simulation technology and hands-on clinical experience. She praised the center's innovative approach to combining technical training with emphasis on compassion and patient advocacy. Sophia's presentation about her research on portable diagnostic devices captivated the audience, demonstrating how young innovators were thinking creatively about healthcare challenges. Her work on developing low-cost, user-friendly medical devices for emergency situations had already attracted the attention of major medical device companies and international humanitarian organizations. When Marcus took the stage for his keynote address, the audience quieted with the attention that his reputation and the day's significance demanded. "Ladies and gentlemen, 6 months ago, my son Tommy nearly died in this hospital's emergency room. He was saved by a nurse named Linda Rodriguez, who risked her career to perform a life-saving procedure when traditional protocols weren't sufficient." Marcus paused, allowing the audience to absorb the personal nature of his remarks. "That experience taught me something profound about healthcare and about the people who provide it. The difference between life and death often comes down to individual decisions made by healthcare professionals who are willing to put patients first, even when it's difficult or risky." He gestured toward Linda, who was sitting in the front row. Linda Rodriguez represents thousands of healthcare professionals who make those kinds of decisions every day. They work long hours for modest pay, they deal with life and death situations on a regular basis, and they often do so without adequate support or recognition. The audience murmured in agreement, recognizing the truth in Marcus's observations about the challenges facing healthcare workers. The Thornfield Center for Nursing Excellence exists because we believe that supporting healthcare professionals isn't just morally right. It's strategically essential. When we invest in the people who care for us during our most vulnerable moments, we're investing in the foundation of a healthy society. Marcus outlined the center's philosophy of combining rigorous clinical training with strong support systems, noting that healthcare professionals performed best when they felt valued and empowered rather than overworked and underappreciated. But this center is about more than just nursing education, Marcus continued. It's about creating a model for how society can support the people who dedicate their lives to serving others. It's about recognizing that healthcare excellence requires not just individual commitment, but institutional support. He described the center's various programs, from basic nursing education to advanced specialty training, from veteran transition support to international healthcare development initiatives. Each program reflected the understanding that healthcare was both a local responsibility and a global challenge. Linda Rodriguez saved my son's life, but she's also helping to save the future of healthcare itself. Through her leadership of this center, she's ensuring that the next generation of healthcare professionals will be better prepared, better supported, and better equipped to provide the kind of care that every patient deserves. The audience erupted in sustained applause as Marcus concluded his remarks, recognizing both the personal story that had inspired the center's creation and the broader vision it represented. Linda took the stage for closing remarks, looking out at an audience that included many of the people who had shaped her journey from struggling single mother to recognized healthcare leader. 6 months ago, I was a night shift nurse worried about paying my bills and my daughter's college tuition. Today, I stand before you as the director of a facility that represents everything I believe about healthcare excellence and professional support. She paused, gathering her thoughts about how to express the transformation that had occurred not just in her own life, but in her understanding of what was possible when people committed to supporting excellence. The Thornfield Center exists because one family chose to express their gratitude through action rather than just words. But it also exists because healthcare professionals everywhere deserve to know that their dedication and sacrifice are valued. Linda spoke about the center's programs and their early successes, but focused most of her remarks on the philosophy that guided the institution's work. We believe that healthcare excellence isn't just about individual competence. It's about creating systems that support and empower the people who provide care. We believe that investing in healthcare professionals is investing in patient outcomes. And we believe that recognizing excellence encourages others to strive for the same high standards. She looked towards Sophia, whose presence represented the future that became possible when young people received the support they needed to pursue their dreams. This center is ultimately about hope. Hope that healthcare can be both compassionate and excellent. Hope that people who choose careers in service to others will be supported rather than exploited. And hope that the next generation will have even better tools and training than we had. As the ceremony concluded with a ribbon cutting that officially opened the center, Linda reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. A split-second decision to save a child's life had led to recognition, support, and opportunities she had never imagined possible. But perhaps more importantly, that decision had created a ripple effect that was benefiting healthcare professionals and patients far beyond her individual situation. The center would train thousands of nurses and other healthcare workers over the coming years, improving patient care throughout the region and beyond. Tommy approached Linda as guests began touring the facility, his enthusiasm for the center's technology undiminished by the formal ceremony. "Nurse Linda, when I grow up, can I come work here too?" Linda knelt beside him, touched by his continued interest in healthcare and his loyalty to their friendship. "Tommy, if you decide you want to work in healthcare, this center will be here to help you become the best healthcare professional you can be." "Cool! Maybe I'll be a nurse like you, or maybe I'll be a doctor, or maybe I'll invent new machines to help sick people." Marcus joined the conversation, his pride in his son's aspirations evident in his expression. Whatever Tommy decides to do, he'll know that helping others is one of the most important things anyone can do with their life. As the day wound down and guests departed, Linda stood in the center's main hall with her daughter, Patricia, Marcus, and Tommy, looking around at the facility that represented so much more than just an educational institution. "Mom," Sophia said, "I'm proud of what you've built here. This center is going to change so many lives." Linda smiled, thinking about all the healthcare professionals who would train in these rooms, all the patients who would benefit from their improved skills, and all the families who would experience better outcomes because of the investment in healthcare excellence. "It's not just what I've built, sweetheart. It's what we've all built together. This center exists because people chose to support excellence, rather than just accept mediocrity." Patricia added, "Linda, you've created something that will outlast all of us. Long after we're gone, this center will still be training healthcare professionals and improving patient care." Marcus nodded in agreement. "Sometimes the most important changes start with individual acts of courage. Your decision to save Tommy's life didn't just save one child, it created a movement that's going to benefit countless others." As they prepared to leave the center, Linda took one last look around the facility that bore her name and represented her values. The Linda Rodriguez Center for Nursing Excellence would continue her work long after she retired, ensuring that future generations of healthcare professionals would receive the support and training they needed to provide excellent patient care. Walking to her car, Linda thought about the patients she would care for during her shifts at the hospital, the students she would mentor through the center's programs, and the continued opportunities to make a difference in people's lives. Her story had begun with a simple commitment to helping others, and it had grown into something that would impact healthcare for years to come. The nurse who had risked everything to save a billionaire's son had discovered that her own life could be transformed in the process, and that individual acts of courage could create lasting change that benefited entire communities. As she drove home through the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, Linda Rodriguez knew that her most important work was still ahead of her, and she was ready for whatever challenges and opportunities the future would bring. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.